thing about singing songs that are familiar to us, we want to keep going. And a topic like that fitting into the sermon series, this is our third week in the section about putting on the armor of God. I've used the title of the topic, Suit Up. I chose that title to draw our attention to the need to use the armor that God has provided. There's one thing to think about the armor of God, but then being called to suit up is the reminder that we need to take our responsibility and put it on as well. Our first sermon drew attention to the truth that we live in a spiritually hostile environment, and that we have an armor to protect us against the spiritual attack that goes on around us. Last week we looked at our passages about the accuser, the liar, who we refer to as Satan or the devil. Both of those terms are to refer to the nature. Knowing our enemy and his tactics enables us to be prepared for the attack. Reading of Satan's attack on Job. Why did he attack Job? It says because he was a blameless and upright person. So that reminds us that Satan will do the same to us if we want to live blameless and upright lives, and that his tactics have not changed. The way that Satan has attacked over the last thousands of years works, so he'll continue to do so. But being prepared for the attack by following the call to put on the full armor is the focus of this week. This week we're going to look at Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 13. On page 1824 if you're following along with our guest Bibles. Verse 13 is the last verse before we get to the specific parts of the armor. We've looked at the connection from 10 to 13 because of the thoughts that are contained into it. Before we get into the specific parts, the section that we've been looking at says, finally, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Therefore, today's verse, therefore put on the full armor of God so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground, and after you have done everything, to stand. If you look at verse 13, therefore put on the full armor of God so that when the day of evil comes you may be able to stand your ground, and after you've done everything, to stand. The passage is really not that complicated to understand, is it? It's a reference to something that makes a lot of sense. The difficulty arises in the application. It's remembering to do that. It's the all right, that is available. That's why I should be doing what I'm doing. Verses 11 and 13 have the call for us to put on the full armor. And it's in these verses that we looked at that they were an aorist imperative, which means that we do this at a specific point in time, and that action has continual impact. Once we've put on Jesus and been clothed in him, we have put on the armor of God. Putting off the old self and putting on the new self was addressed in Ephesians chapter 4, 22 through 24. Our surrender to Jesus at baptism is the point of that exchange. That's when we receive the armor of God. Jesus is willing to protect us, and we need to choose to put his armor on. In the same way that we looked at with David and Saul in the armor. Well, David rejected Saul's armor and chose to put on the armor of God in order to take on Goliath. In a sense, we do this once and it has continual effect. And in another sense, we have to choose to continue to put it on daily for it to protect us. Jesus gives us the armor and we choose to be protected by it or to be vulnerable by not using it. Which is why it says, put on the full armor. Our focus is on that aspect, not just part of the armor, but why does he say full armor? And he says it twice. Therefore, put on the full armor of God. What's the reason? So that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground, and after you have done everything, to stand. We begin with a therefore. refers to the content of the previous verses. From now on, we put on the full armor of God that God has provided in order to stand against the schemes of the devil and those that work with him. That is what we're called to do. It is a from now on, and it is to be a complete armor that God provides. It's not our armor. Put on the full armor that God provides. It's God's armor, and we are to put on all of it. Then we can stand against the devil and those that work with him. The transliteration of the passage, transliteration means when you look at how the Greek sentence is and then the English words that go underneath it. So sometimes that gets us in trouble because English grammar and Greek grammar are written differently. But the passage in the translation, it's just the transliteration, says, because of this, take up the complete armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the day evil, and all things having done, to stand. Not how we would say it in English, but there's some parts in there that are important. That you might be able to withstand in the day, what day? The day evil. That's the modifier. And all things having done. Once everything is done, you continue to stand. We're going to talk about the tense of that. As I was researching through it and I was looking at one of the commentaries, Barnes' notes for this, it says, in the day evil, or in the evil day, the day of temptation, the day that we are violently assaulted. That's an imagery we're not necessarily familiar with. So you put on the armor so that in the day evil, in the evil day, when you get assaulted, you already have the armor on. It's too late in the middle of the assault to go get the armor. But we put it on because we're going into a hostile environment. And having done all, to stand. To stand there is the idea of to overcome. The Greek word means to work out, to effect, to produce, and then to work up or to make an end, to vanquish. Isn't that kind of a cool concept? So that once you've done everything, then vanquish. Like destroy them all. Take them all out. The idea seems to be that they were to overcome or vanquish all their foes. And thus, when all the foes are vanquished, you stand and realize the victory that you've been provided. The whole language here is taken from war, and the idea that every foe was to be subdued, no matter how numerous or formidable they might be. Safety and triumph could only be looked for and only be appreciated when every enemy was slain. When do you feel free to take off the armor? Once the enemies are gone. And I was thinking about that. That's what we do when we gather on Sunday morning, right? We should have armor racks. You come in, you hang up your shield, you put your helmet on, because you've wore the armor all week, haven't you? This is the time when you can come into the barracks and say, this is a place of safety. Here's a place of peace. I'm with my fellow soldiers. And you can say it's been a really tiring week, or you know what, it was kind of boring. I took my stand and nothing really happened. I didn't really see much action. Or you can say, you might not have seen much action, but I was sure assaulted with this, this, and this. That's a part of what we do when we gather on a Sunday, is we come in and hang up the armor and we can relax with one another. But if God says, attention, you stand up. And there is no at ease until he says, at ease. That's what we do when we enter the Word of God. We listen for the call of the commander, and we appreciate that and put it into our lives. We fight until there is full victory. Isn't that an important concept? Not just partial victory, but full victory. That's what's included in that whole section that maybe we miss because we don't use the words the way that they would use the words. We need the full armor to be able to handle the opposition, and we're called to hold our ground as soldiers as we take our stand and we hold off the enemy. Over the next several weeks, we're going to be looking at the parts of the armor and their significance, but this week, I don't want to get into the parts, I want to get into the whole. The idea that the call here twice has already been put on the full armor. Before he tells us what all the parts are, he says, you better put it all on. All of it is important. The text is reminding us that being mostly protected is still being unprotected. The story of Achilles. Why is that story passed on and on and on and on? It goes way back to Homer in the Iliad. This was a story that was told that Jesus would have known. I mean, this is old teaching. The point is made clear in Homer's story of Achilles and his heel. From History.com I found this, which said that according to the myths and stories composed long after the Iliad, Thetis, which is Achilles' mother, was extraordinarily concerned about her baby son's mortality. She did everything she could to make him immortal. And so in this fictitious story about how do you protect your children, which is a kind of a theme that we like, how do you make sure that people are okay? Well, the story is that she burned him over a fire every night, then dressed his wounds with ambrosial ointment. She dunked him in the river Styx, whose waters were said to confer invulnerability to the gods. This is the process of making him so he could handle anything. The thing is, she still had to hold on to him during this process. So where does she hold her son? By his heel. As she would dip him in and pull him back out. But she held him in the same spot all the time. So the only spot on his entire body that did not have this protection was his one tendon, which is still called Achilles tendon today, isn't it? But this is weird to us, but this is a story that's passed on and on and on about you can try to protect other people, you can try to protect your family, but everybody has a vulnerability, don't we? You can't protect anyone completely. As a result, Achilles was invulnerable everywhere, but there was an arrow shot by Paris and directed by Apollo, and that struck his heel, his Achilles tendon, and the story is he dies from that. That's long after the victory. The moral of the story is being mostly protected is still being unprotected, and that we all have vulnerabilities. You cannot keep anyone from being attacked. Is that true? You pray for your kids, don't you? You pray for the church. You pray for your spouse. Pray for your parents. You pray for your friends. You pray for your neighbors. But can you keep anybody from being attacked? No, but you can pray that they would put on the full armor, that they would be protected by God, and that they would make those choices. The armor that's being mentioned, I want a couple things to notice about the armor. One is that I'm misleading you by the picture in the background. The armor that's referred to is the Roman armor. It looks more like this, which I would think, between this and medieval armor, I would take the medieval armor. But this is what they had at the time. This is what was effective, and this is what was useful. We're talking about the Roman armor. It was meant for group combat, and it's also meant for assault from the front. Put those two things deep in your thinker, because we're going to keep going back to these. It's meant for group combat. Group combat. Not individual, group combat. And its only protection is from the front. The breastplate ends at the sides. The feet are protected from the front. The shield is at the front. You have nothing behind you. This was meant for group combat and assault from the front. The shields could be used in formations to surround the whole group. And if a soldier broke formation and was found outside of the group during an attack, they were very vulnerable. But together, they could form the shields around the outside and layer them over the top like scales. They could take arrows from any direction. They could lift the shields up and move as a group. They practiced formations. They could not be attacked from the side. They could not be attacked from the top because they worked as a group. But an individual soldier could be taken out in all kinds of ways because they only had limited protection. How about this? It could handle frontal attacks, but could not handle backstabbers. Right? You had to trust completely in those that you were in formation with. Because if any of them was a backstabber, they could take out your platoon. They could take out your formation. You had to have reliance on one another. But we don't have access to that type of armor, and even if we brought in somebody like Shirley's son Jason, who is a soldier who served in the Canadian military, he's not going to be able to talk about this type of armor. Nobody uses it anymore. It's replaced by armor that protects the entire person. So I had an object lesson in mind. I'd like to share with you my object lesson for the week. What? I would like to share it, but I can't because my object lesson decided to not show up. So we could pause here and come back next week, or we could go ahead. I'll tell you what I was thinking. So this is what I had in mind. And once I found out that I couldn't have my object lesson, I decided, well, I'll do an interview. So I did an interview this week with a local legend who fit the concept perfectly. Somebody that I thought could explain the idea of being protected, of standing your ground, and that epitomized the idea of the need for the entire armor, that you can't go without any of it. I was going to have Austin come in his goalie gear. Because unlike the other players that play hockey, the goalie epitomizes what we're talking about. The goalie is not made for long distance, right? The goalie is to stand, and every part of that armor is important. So I did an interview. According to this chart, there's 13 different parts to the armor that a goalie wears. And that you need all of them. Of course, this is probably from a sports store that says you got to buy all of them from us, but the goalie has these parts. These are the parts that they're expected to wear. It strikes me that the goalie gear is an illustration of this. So I asked him 5 questions. I was going to do it here. Wouldn't that have been cool? Standing in front of the net, talking through his goalie mask. So it was a good idea. So I said, what part of the equipment would you go on the ice without? And why? Out of those 13 pieces, is there any part of it that you just say, this is stupid, I'm not going to use it? If you're playing ball hockey, or if you're just playing for fun, if it's not a contact and you don't have to worry about the other dangers, what would be necessary for that environment and what would be optional? Basically, my question was, what's the minimum to do what you do? What would be the minimum that you would get away with? Then I asked about the actual process of defending the goal. How far would you play from the goal and why would you go away from it? Where do you stand as a goalie and why do you stand there? And I thought this would be interesting because, of course, this is what he's been learning and training and practicing over and over and over. So what do you get taught about being a goalie? What's the difference between learning a goalie skills and, just kind of getting shot in the face with a hockey ball, which is what we used to do. It worked. I asked him, what protection do you have from behind? You look at a goalie, but if you turn around, if you decide, I'm just going to play backwards, is that going to work? So what are the 5 things that all goalies should work on? How do you become a better goalie? What are the 5 things that you do to be able to put on the full armor and take your stand? I hope you're seeing how this correlates to the passage. So here were his answers, because he didn't know how I was going to use them. He just thought I was asking about hockey, which is like 2 times in my life I've ever done. So what part of the equipment would you go on? He said, I would rather just not have the neck guard. So why might he do that? It can be hot, and it can seem redundant. The way that the mask is, the neck guard, is it there for a reason? Yes. You might not want to wear it, but it's there for a reason. But out of them all, it could mean a shot to the throat. That's what it's there for. So he would take the risk. It's not likely I'm going to get hit in the throat. The next question, if you're playing ball hockey, what would he wear? Well, he says, here's what's necessary. It's necessary to wear your jersey. I thought that was funny. But you got to protect, all your equipment's underneath, but you got to know which team you're playing on. Does that kind of make sense? Your jersey, your helmet, your gloves, your shoes, and your jock. I wonder who added that one in. You make sure you wear that too. You know what I added? He didn't say a stick. But I think a goalie stick would be relevant for what you're doing. But he said it doesn't matter. You don't have to wear your shin pads. You don't have to wear your Under Armour. The rest of that's not important. But still, this is the major parts of the goalie equipment. These are the things that he would wear, even just for fun. So my third question about where would you play? What's your zone? And why would you leave the net? He said, I would play at the top of the crease so that I can challenge the shooter. But there's a limit to where he would play. It's painted right into the ice. He knows you can go that far, but you don't go farther. I don't get it when the goalie comes out and skates around behind and does that kind of stuff. That doesn't make sense to me, but sometimes that's part of being a player and passing the puck and keeping things moving. But to me, if you're a goalie, you stay with the goal. You just stick your ground and that's it. So he said the same sort of thing. But if you don't have to be tight to the goal, you can come out a bit, but you got to know how far. If you're going to wear the armor, does that make sense? You can come out a bit, but you better stay near the goal. You don't go too far. What protection do you have from behind? His pants. So just the hockey pants. The hockey pants help you if you fall, then you don't bruise your tailbone. And I thought, yeah, God provides for that too. Does he help you when you fall? And you can get back up again without being too hurt? But that's about it. You don't play a goalie backwards because you don't have the equipment. You got to make sure that you're taking things face on. So there's a picture of him. So I asked the 5th question. What are the 5 things you work on as being a goalie? It sounds like he's pretty well taught. So 5 things that'll make you a better goalie. Are you going to need what things? You're going to need focus. You're going to need hard work. You have to be competitive. You're going to develop technical skills, and you have to have balance. So there's our sermon application. What are the 5 things, if we're going to put on the full armor, if we're going to take our stand, if we're going to stand in the way to vanquish all enemies? What are the 5 ways that we can do that? This week, put on the full armor and focus. Focus on the reality of an attack. Does that make sense? One of the things that a goalie has to do is keep an eye on the puck. We got to know where the puck is at all times, because that's what you're there for. If we're going to keep ourselves and keep others safe, one of the things that we work on is that we focus. We pay attention to what's going on around us. You put in the hard work. You put in the hard work to do the task at hand. There is no coasting. You have to do your best. When you're on the ice, you play to your best. When you practice to your best. See, when we're in a hostile environment, we do our best. We put in the hard work. We also have to be competitive. Stand in the way. A goalie that won't take a shot is not much of a goalie. Right? If you're scared of the puck, you're not going to last long. But to be competitive, to know that that's a part of it, they're going to come for you. It's like a punt receiver. Who says I'll do that job? No, but we know that when we step out there, we're going to get a puck in the head. Somebody's shooting at us. So be competitive. Stand in the way. Be ready for opposition. Fight back. The idea is you play to win. It's not just play for fun, but you play to win. Be competitive. The devil is approaching, but be competitive. Did you read all those yet? Develop your technical skills. If you want to be a better goalie, if you want to be able to take your stand, develop your technical skills through spiritual disciplines, Bible study, Bible reading, prayer, memorization, meditation, fasting, etc. Pick up your speed, your technical skills. What is it that allows you to stand? Well, get better at it. Put in the proficiency. And strengthen your balance. Know that the enemy wants to knock you off balance. Know that they're going to come and charge the net every once in a while. So be more flexible and get back up when you get hit. When they shoot low, you go low, but then you get back up. But keep your balance. Know that they're not going to shoot right at you. They're going to try to get around you. Satan does the same thing. He still wants to attack from behind, but don't let him get back there. Get in the way. This was my understanding of how to help us with this verse. Because from now on, we're going to get into all the parts of the armor. But if you don't desire to put on all of the armor, it makes a difference. God has called us with these words. Therefore, put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground. And after you have done everything, to stand. Next week, we look at the first of the parts of the armor as we focus on the belt of truth, how it's essential to everything else. And we're going to talk about truth as it's mentioned in Scripture.